Hello, everyone, and welcome to CCSI's Ransomware in K-12 Education webinar. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Rob Villano. Rob is the pre-sales security engineer at CCSI. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please message me, Catherine Irizarry, on the WebEx chat. I'll be asking Rob these questions at our Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please also be aware that this webinar will be recorded. We can send you the webinar recording link after if you request, or you can find it published on the CCSI website. For those of us just joining, welcome, and we will begin our webinar now. Take it away, Rob.
Well, thanks, Kat. I appreciate that introduction, and welcome everyone to CCSI's educational webinar today titled Ransomware in K-12 Education. My name is Rob Villano. I'm the pre-sales security engineer here at CCSI, and I'll be taking you through today's informative information as we discuss ransomware. So first and foremost, I'm the pre-sales security engineer at CCSI. I'm first and foremost a data security and data privacy advocate, specializing in the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of highly sensitive data. I've done so in highly regulated environments and industries, financial services, and healthcare. And I've done that by way of security assessments and security architecture reviews in these regulated environments. I also hold two multiple security certifications, as well as having earned 2 technology degrees in my background. I can be reached at CCSI using the email below, rvillano@ccsinet.com. So as we get started, why CCSI? CCSI has been around since 1974. We've enjoyed over 4 decades of being in the IT space, and our core values still are very present in our presentation to our customers and in all of our relationships of honesty, integrity, and trust. These are the bedrock convictions that we operate with today. Our services include infrastructure, third-party maintenance, cloud and data center, cybersecurity, which we'll be speaking to today, as well as our NOC and SOC services as well. So as we begin today's discussion, 3 key things that I'd like folks to focus on, and that would be 3 takeaways: how ransomware works, infects, and spreads, how to prevent ransomware using the NIST CSF framework, which is an important framework for K-12, and then finally, using our CCSI ransomware prevention checklist and what I call the Elite 11 security controls to really prevent against ransomware spreads and attacks. So let's get started. What is ransomware? Well, the definition is really a type of malware, but it's really malicious malware that denies your ability for accessing your system. And ultimately, these bad actors require a ransom to restore your access. That payment comes in the form of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, credit cards, or even untraceable gift cards. The FBI, as well as CISA, do not recommend paying the ransom, and we'll get into this later as to why. But first and foremost, victims who often pay are also frequently targeted again. And so that's one of the areas why the recommendation is not to do so. An infection such as ransomware, we'll look at this later on, can really spread rapidly throughout an organization and wreak havoc throughout it, especially in the K-12 space. So based on a recent report, a survey was conducted by Douglas Levin, the State of K-12 Cybersecurity 2020 Year in Review is the title of the report, and they looked at a number of different areas for 2020. You can imagine the pandemic wreaked havoc within K-12 space regarding these types of attacks, specifically ransomware. They looked at what type of data is at risk. I think we can imagine what type it is, personally identifiable, that of the student, the parent, the guardian, family members, educators, and other school staff. This information is really valuable on the dark web. It gets a great deal of attention as well as compensation for this type of information, especially in large quantities. So that's the data that's at risk, and that's the type of data that needs to be safeguarded. The number of records that were exposed in ransomware based on this survey was over 560,000 current students and 56,000 current staff at 7 districts. So the impact was rather large. The significant breach, or a significant data breach within 2020, was May's ransomware, which is really a significant attack vector. It compromised the Toledo, Ohio public schools, stealing over 9 gigabytes of data. And it included sensitive student data and even employee data. So there's impact to these types of attacks, obviously. They looked at, are schools paying the ransom? They were happy to find that schools, by and large, are not. Their demands have significantly increased, though, and they're even seeing those demands increasing or exceeding $1 million per incident. And for school districts, obviously, this is a huge payment, or a huge per incident value. So what types of schools have been closed or was subject to closures? There were quite a few, right? So many class cancellations, school closures, and associated with ransomware had tripled last year. One of the key areas in which they're looking to prevent against this year. And again, this was the State of K-12 Cybersecurity Report for 2020, the year in review. So let's look at, how does ransomware work, infect, and spread? It begins by an attacker's threats, right? And those threats can come in the form of phishing emails, malicious attachments, or drive-by downloading. A drive-by download is simply visiting a website, and unbeknownst to the user, you're actually downloading types of code or software to your own machine, thereby compromising your system. It then infects and encrypts, locking the computer, blocking network access, and rendering files inaccessible. How do you know you have ransomware? You'll see it in the file extensions. You'll actually see multiple types of file extensions. They may be crypto, they may be XXX, so on and so forth. We'll get into an example of what the attack looks like in just a bit. It then follows the chain to extortion or exploitation by way of the attackers and paying a ransom to decrypt the system. So if you want your data back, you're going to have to pay, whether it be Bitcoin or other forms of compensation, or else they threaten to either destroy the decryption key or release sensitive data to the public, which really acts as a double extortion type of scenario. So these bad actors are well versed in this. And so it's important to have preventions in place. And again, we'll get into that as we go through the webinar. So as we found out, it's not only K through 12. Ransomware does not discriminate. Small and medium-sized businesses are in scope. Obviously K through 12 is a key risk vector these days, based on what we experienced last year. But it's all types of industries. It's healthcare, it's law firms, it's financial institutions. And the common theme is access to sensitive information, which is very valuable to these criminals. What's at stake for folks who are attacked and experience an infection is obviously financial and reputational damage. That of the brand, that of the district, that of the actual infrastructure that supports it. So it's very important to have these preventions in place. Some of the impacted organizations are across all verticals, right? So you'll look at, as I mentioned before, healthcare, legal, retail, shipping, and automotive. Some of the largest names, such as FedEx and Honda and Nissan. The National Health System over in the UK was hit. So it's really not discriminatory. These days, it's really important to understand your risk vectors and understand your risk profile for these types of scenarios. So the common types of ransomware, most common would be crypto malware, right? Where, as we reviewed previously, you know, your system is compromised. All of a sudden, you walk in and you know you've had a bad day when you see a screen that says you've been locked out. And we'll review that in a moment as to what that looks like. And that's the most common. There are others such as lockers, scareware, which is a type of a fake software that claims to the user that it's detected a virus and gets you to do certain things which compromise your system. There's even ransomware as a service for bad actors on the dark web. The most recent types of ransomware was, NotPetya, which was, I think, around 2017, and it relied on the Eternal Blue vulnerability, which is an old Microsoft-related vulnerability related to RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. It was actually created by the NSA. It was leaked in a breach during that year, 2017. And Microsoft did provide a patch, but unfortunately, as I think some of us are aware, some cybersecurity hygiene is not always the most timely. So some of these school districts and some of the even organizations had not patched for that particular vulnerability. And that NotPetya ransomware attack caused $10 billion of damage. Most notably, it irreversibly encrypted the computer's master boot records, so there was no way that you were going to decrypt that hard drive. And so it was quite a bunch of damage back in 2017 caused by that. The other one that I want to focus on was WannaCry. And so I have an example of what WannaCry looked like, and that was in 2017, another crypto locker. It looks something like this. And as I mentioned earlier, if you walked into your computer or systems and this presented itself on your screen, you were having a bad day, and to say the least. And these folks look to raise your emotion to take action very quickly. They provide for a timeout clock, time left, that payment will be raised unless you act in a certain time frame. They also focus on your files will be lost on a certain time and date, right? It's all to get you to move, get you to pay them or do something, right? That social engineering component that we're all too familiar with in phishing also exists here. And so finally, they're looking for a specific payment, and it'll allow you to receive, the encryption key or the decryption key. And so this was an example of the WannaCry breakout back in 2017. It's important to know, though, that ransomware is preventable, right? And so it is not an unstoppable force. It's incredibly important to define that. It is a violent attack, one that wreaks great havoc within systems, one that you certainly want to contain, but it is preventable. And so, as I mentioned earlier, let's take a look at how to go about preventing ransomware in your environments. First and foremost, I believe the journey towards ransomware prevention begins with NIST CSF, and it's no secret why K-12 education law 2D relies upon NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework put out in 2014 by CISA. It's technology and industry agnostic. It's a great framework. It allows people to focus on 5 areas, and I've just put them up on the screen. It's the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. All areas are important. All fall into a scope of defense in depth when you're looking at preventing against ransomware or any other types of attacks. And it begins with the identification phase. And here at CCSI, we offer all of these types of services to put you on your journey to ransomware prevention and to provide for a defense in depth posture in the cybersecurity area. And so penetration tests, first and foremost, are really important to understand what your exposure is, what kinds of weaknesses, what types of exploits there may be. The only way to define that with your perimeter defenses is through a penetration test. We offer those here at CCSI. Vulnerability management to discover weaknesses on your network or at the host level are very much important. You'd be surprised how many unpatched systems there are and where patches are available. It's important to understand what your risks are and how you will mitigate them. And the third area in the identification phase is privileged access. Too many times we have what's called privileged access creep, if you will, where you start out and you begin with a low level of access to do your job function, but before you know, over the years, you've been involved in so many different things where you have elevated access to things that you probably shouldn't. And so that raises or, expands what we like to call the attack surface. And it's something you really want to hone in on and, make sure that it's not only defined, but you prevent against it as well. Moving along to the protect phase, any defense in depth or robust cybersecurity program relies on a robust security and awareness program. And so here at CCSI, we partner with really key vendors. One key vendor in focus does a really great job at providing for, phishing awareness and phishing testing, even ransomware testing, where the goal is to alert and to inform our employees and our constituents as to what not to do and what they should be doing to ensure the safeguarding of information. And so that's really an important area to focus on when we talk about prevention. Of course, patching cadence, making sure that we're patching in a regular type of framework, and we're attacking those areas that we've demonstrated weakness in. We're applying the patches and testing them and making sure things are up to the versions that are necessary so that those weaknesses are remediated. As we move to the detect phase, one common theme is to monitor. And so here at CCSI, we have a system called Threat Protect, and we'll get into this in a little bit of detail later on. But you'd want to understand through monitoring, continuous monitoring at the endpoint level, what types of potentially malicious activity are taking place, and perhaps even in an artificial intelligence way, you can provide for a response mechanism to those potential anomalous behavior. And so we here specialize with our vendor solutions and through our Threat Protect platform in those areas. You also as well want to have a robust email security gateway or to prevent against phishing. That goes hand in hand with your security awareness program. Finally, as we look at the recovery phase to round out the overall framework, the one way to prevent against ransomware and where the user or the organization or the school district holds the key is to have a valid backup. If you have a valid backup and you understand that's air-gapped or offline, you understand that you can get your systems back up and running based upon your security incident response plan. And so it's really vitally important to make sure that you have valid backups. For those districts or those organizations that can or have the resources, disaster recovery as a service, or DRAS as it were, is a really important technology and a wonderful technology because it allows for business continuity or having your business up and running while you would need to rebuild potentially your production systems. Back in the day, some time ago, you'd have to build an alternative data center, no longer with cloud services, and so DRAS is just one of those services. And so I wanted to review, as I mentioned earlier, what I call the Elite 11 controls, or using the CCSI ransomware prevention checklist and implementing these types of controls so that you can really have significant protection and prevention against ransomware, right? And so here at CCSI, we offer an excellent checklist. We call it the CCSI Ransomware Protection Checklist. It basically protects, in this case, the district or businesses at large from an attack. We focus on endpoint protection, patch and configuration management, third parties and vulnerability management, perimeter security, all of the things that you can imagine that go towards a robust prevention mechanism against ransomware. Many of these areas we've mentioned before. And so I would encourage everyone on the phone to take a look at it, download it from our site. There'll be a survey later on that you can gain access to it. It's really a thorough checklist to prevent against these types of attacks. The parts that we want to focus on is, at least for this particular area, the checklist is you need to have strong authentication. Again, your employee security awareness program needs to be strong. For those of us that use vulnerable internet-facing services, number 6 is really important, right? Because Microsoft knows that they have vulnerabilities within remote desktop protocol and server message block. If you don't need these services, if you're not using them on a particular endpoint server, restrict them or disable them, right? There's no need to have them. Why give an open risk vector if you don't have to? We need to absolutely exercise good judgment, especially with email. That's the phishing component of the risk vectors that we've spoken about. Always use, to the extent that you can, anti-ransomware endpoint software. Continuously monitor your endpoints. We hope that you'll consider and use our Threat Protect platform for this. And as I mentioned before, the recovery phase always begins with a valid backup. And for those who are interested, DRAS is a wonderful technology to have a business continuity in the cloud. So let's look at and consider, should you pay the ransom? Well, first and foremost, the FBI says by their FBI alert, high impact ransomware attacks threaten U.S. businesses and organizations. This was put out in October of 2019. They don't advocate paying a ransom. They have seen a few organizations, first and foremost, publicly admit to paying ransoms, but bad actors, more importantly, will publicize these types of things on the dark web. So you actually target yourself for future attacks, right? And what happens is that scuttlebutt gets out, and what they've been seeing is more and more attacks take place subsequently. I would also like to point out, and I think this is fairly obvious, that paying a ransom to a criminal doesn't guarantee, recovery, right? So you can think that you're going shopping at Walmart and Target, and there's a warranty, and there certainly is. But when you're giving money to a criminal, it's not immediately obvious that you're going to get what you're paying for. And so what has also been found is less than half of ransomware victims are able to successfully restore their systems. So the prevailing theme is don't pay the ransom. The key to, preventing against this and not having to do this, have a valid backup. Make sure it works. Test it significantly and often, and that prevents against paying the ransom. So I'd like to take you through what we call our CCSI cybersecurity services, which map to NIST CSF. Many of us are aware of Education Law 2D and its alignment with NIST cybersecurity framework. And so here at CCSI, we put together what we call a cybersecurity wheel, which outlines those 5 areas, the center of which is the CCSI Threat Protect Managed Security Operations Center. And so here we're monitoring on a 24/7 basis threats and alerting and providing those alerts to our customers. We're making them aware of anomalous behavior, and we're basically keeping them out of harm's way. The identification phase starts and begins at number 1 in the light pale blue, as we see here. It consists of a number of different areas, vulnerability management, where you want to identify your weaknesses. It can also consist of penetration tests, risk assessments, and any sort of evaluation of your regulatory compliance needs. We also get involved in tabletop exercises to evaluate incident responses as part of not the identification phase, but in general as an assessment. As we turn to the protection phase, we offer a great deal and a number of services in this area, not the least of which is managed endpoint. So we want to make sure that, we're monitoring those endpoints for anomalous behavior, making sure that we're keeping our customers out of harm's way. We're alerting and triaging those alerts and making sure that if a security incident plan is necessary, we alert our customers. And so as part of the protection phase, we also offer security awareness products and services where we're informing users, employees, staff, keeping them educated as to the current threats and what security best practices are available. An educated workforce goes a long way to keeping your cybersecurity program strong and your controls strong against these types of attacks. It's so vitally important to have it. And so as we round out the overall framework, we look at respond and recover, where again, we're looking at providing for backup as a service, as well as disaster recovery as a service, and ensuring that there's a mechanism to get back and running if something was exposed or there was an attack. As I mentioned earlier, CCSI is certified to offer education law 2D solutions. These are generally available and accessible via the BOCES Land-WAN contract. I would encourage you to reach out to Joe Riccio, Director of K-12 Sales and Operations. Joe's a wonderful resource. He's been here for 40 years and has been around the block with K-12 and is just a terrific resource with any questions or concerns you may have with regard to these types of compliance issues, but more importantly, the BOCES Land-WAN contract as well. CCSI is SOC 2 Type 2 certified. That means that we take confidentiality, integrity, and availability of services very seriously. Our NOC here in Bohemia is on site, and that is SOC 2 Type 2 certified from a security perspective. We've also noted a number of awards and been recognized over the years as a top Long Island workplace, as well as being involved with BOCES and one of the top 10 managed IT service companies recently. We've enjoyed a long run and a great deal of success with our customers, particularly in the K-12 area, but across the board in IT. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a survey, and we would love for you to complete it, supplying information for any future cybersecurity webinars or anything at all you would like for us to provide in the cybersecurity space. We hope that you can supply that information by completing our survey, and you'll receive a free ransomware prevention checklist. That's the checklist that I spoke briefly on earlier to protect your district from an attack.
Okay, so now we're going to be opening up for Q&A. We got some questions in. I will start with this one. If you're using a NAS, network attached storage, for file backups, would that likely be encrypted during a ransomware attack as well, since it is connected to the same network?
It's possible that it could. You really want to offline files and storage. It's possible it has happened. And so anything that's on the network theoretically is vulnerable. What you'd want to do is provide an air gap solution where it's either offline or walled off, if you will, and so that you can ensure that you have your data readily available to restore if and when it's needed.
Okay, thank you, Rob. The next question we got in was, what is the most common attack vector used in ransomware?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, what the typical scenario is a phishing attack which compromises a workstation. And then ultimately those attackers scan for vulnerable services such as RDP, and then they'll brute force the RDP credentials to break in and spread it laterally within your environments. This has been done over and over again, particularly because RDP is a vulnerable service that is well known. There are others, but this is the typical scenario that takes place.
Thank you. And the next question we have is, what are the best investments to prevent against a ransomware attack and its impact?
Well, that's a really good question because, we recognize at CCSI that, budgets are tight, money is tough to come by, obviously. And so when you're talking about investing in vendor solutions or cybersecurity services, you want to get the most bang for your buck. Certainly strong authentication by multi-factor if you have publicly accessible sites is a great investment. A simple investment using role-based access control, right? Limiting user access can go a long way to reducing your attack surface. An endpoint solution always pays dividends because you don't know what's going on for what you can't see and don't have visibility of. And so endpoint protection certainly provides that visibility. I had mentioned Threat Protect earlier. It does a great job at providing that visibility. And so those are great areas, but something as simple as, executing strong backups, making sure you have your data readily available, making sure that your backup works and that you can recover. That doesn't cost a great sum of money because many of us have backups in place already. So all of those types of processes and procedures, if we can tighten those up and if money's even necessary to update some of the software, those are really strong investments to make to lower your attack surface.
Great, thanks, Rob. We just got another message in the chat. You guys can continue to message me privately or to the open chats. We got a question saying, scenario, malware is hiding on the network, backup is air-gapped. Will the malware carry over to the air-gapped backup data?
In that scenario, more than likely not. It's tough to know without, further understanding your architecture, but by the sounds of it from what you've typed in here, more than likely not. But the general principle is you want to have your data walled off very significantly, air-gapped, as it were, from the rest of your network. It ensures that no one can get to it, and so that you can proceed in a recovery phase when and if necessary.
Thank you. All right, the last question we have here as of right now is, what design principles are important for containing an outbreak?
Well, I think as we look at this, right, so if you're designing today for, preventing against malware or certainly ransomware, you first want to begin with, and again, it goes back to NIST CSF for us, is categorize the data, understand what you're looking to protect, what's the organizational value of your data, what's critical about it. You want to understand where your data is on what network segments, right? So that you can ultimately implement, physical and logical separation of the networks and the data for various organizational reasons. And so when you do this, what you're really doing is maybe not so eliminating, but you're certainly reducing the possibility of lateral spread within your organization. So that's really important when you're talking about these ransomware types of attacks. You want to contain them as best you can. And so that the design principle is segmentation or network segmentation is quite important in that regard.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, we actually have another one. Can a ransomware compromise cloud data, Google Drive?
It can. Google offers protections against it. So, it's that there's been some notion there about whether it can or can't, but it can. But Google offers security controls with regard to prevent against it. So I'll go that far about it. I really want to get into too much detail on it right now because that's an open-ended question.
All right, that was our last question. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please take the time to go into your email tomorrow morning and fill out the survey. Once you complete the survey, you will receive the ransomware perfection checklist. We will be having one of our sales representatives follow up after the webinar. So if you have any further questions post-webinar, please feel free to ask them, set up time to talk in detail about this topic or our services. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to come here, and we look forward to talking to you all soon. Have a good night.